Good afternoon. My name is Tim Flagg and I'm going to be the host for today's webinar. My first question to you is just to check that you can all hear me okay. You should be able to see on the right hand side a little window where you can ask questions, and if you have any problems, can you please just indicate there, otherwise I'll hope that you can all hear us okay. So I'm just checking whether we can hear okay. It looks like we can. Great, okay. Well, good afternoon. As I say, my name is Tim Flagg and I'm going to be the host for today's webinar, which is, as you know, entitled The Apprenticeship Levy. Is your business ready? And this particular webinar is geared very much towards the finance professionals. We're working in partnership with Accountancy Age and Financial Director to really be able to provide you, financial professionals, with an understanding of how the Apprenticeship Levy will impact upon your business and what you should be doing now to be able to start preparing for that. So I'm joined by a couple of experts on the Apprenticeship Levy who will be sharing their perspectives and be able to answer any questions you have. I'm going to introduce them properly in a minute. Before we do that, I'd just like to take you through a couple of housekeeping points. So first of all, we'll be sharing our screen. So in a minute you'll be able to see some of the slides which we'll be talking you through. But don't worry, we can't see you or hear you. So don't worry if there's stuff going on in the background, that's not a problem. In the unlikely event that your connection drops out, please just go back to the original link that we provided to you and you'll be able to click on that and come back into the room and join us again. There is a Q&A function, which thank you, some of you have already used to let us know that you can hear okay. Please do be thinking of the type of questions that you'd like to put to our panel as we progress through. I'm hoping that a lot of those questions will be answered, but if you have any questions, please do be thinking about those, jot them down. You can also follow us on Twitter. There is #ApprenticeLevy and our Twitter handle is @Arch Apprentices. So please do use those to share any questions you have during the session. There will be some polls, so we are going to be asking some questions to you to find out a little bit more about you during the session. Please do participate in those as well. Lastly, whilst we hope you can stay for the entire hour, the webinar will last an hour, we know that some of you might have to dash off. The webinar will be recorded and we'll be providing that recording to you after the session, and you feel free to share that with your colleagues as well. So, today's agenda is, today's title is The Apprenticeship Levy, Is Your Business Ready? And we've got a couple of speakers who I'm now going to introduce. We have Jason Moss, who is the CEO of Arch Apprentices. Thank you for joining us today, Jason. I know you've been a bit poorly the last couple of days. You've got a bit of a croaky voice there.
Thank you, a bit of a croaky voice.
Struggled through your deathbed to join us.
Thank you.
And Jason is the Chief Executive of Arch and was Managing Director of Pearson in Practice. He has over 15 years experience within the training arena, and he's worked with over 30,000 apprentices, so definitely we'll be able to draw upon Jason's expertise there. And Jason moved into training following a successful career in retail banking with Lloyds Banking Group, where he began as a 16-year-old trainee. So I think that is also a great insight into starting at a young age within an organisation and working his way up. We're also joined by Ben Rowland, who is the co-founder and corporate account director at Arch Apprentices. Ben co-founded Arch Apprentices with Glenn Chalcott Group in 2012, with the first apprentices beginning their apprenticeship the day after the London Olympics, and since then Arch has now started over 1,400 young people on apprentices working with employers such as Google, John Lewis and Barclays, and putting many apprentices through SMEs, charities and government bodies as well. And before that, Ben has over 15 years experience building organisations and initiatives that address social and economic challenges. I've been on the panel with both Ben and Jason a couple of times before, and I know they're very much experts, but also passionate about the role that apprenticeships can play for young people in transforming their lives. So I'm really glad to be able to share their expertise with you today. So that's the introduction to our speakers. After each speaker has gone through and given their key points, we're going to have a Q&A session, and I'll be asking questions to you, the audience, so please do start thinking about those questions. Now, before I hand you over to Ben to tell you a little bit more about the Apprenticeship Levy, could I just find out a little bit more about you? You're going to see a poll come up on the screen, and I'd like you to be able to just tell us a little bit more about you and what it is that you do. This will help us just define exactly what the role of, or how we answer the questions. Now, I know a lot of people here are from finance, but it's also useful to understand if there are people from other functions in the organisation as well. So just seeing those come in, and that's great. Thank you very much for that. It's a little bit like watching election night, although again, we've had a few of those this year, haven't we? It's about 90% people voted now. The majority of people are actually in senior management roles. I imagine that's the CFOs, FDs, and then we've got 22% other. Again, I imagine a lot of that financial, but 21% HR and 9% L&D. That definitely reflects the key areas involved in the apprenticeship program. Thank you for that. And then, are there particular areas that you would like to know more about relating to the Apprenticeship Levy? This, again, will help us to tailor some of the answers that Jason and Ben give as they're going through their slides. We've got 4 areas up here: preparing ahead of April 2017, clarifying the contribution and how to get maximum return, ensuring the skills I need are covered, and understanding how it affects my current employees. Thank you for taking part in these polls. We're seeing there, the majority, I think, people saying clarifying the contribution and how to maximise return is around 50%, followed by preparing and getting started ahead of April 2017. So that's great. Thank you very much for that. Great. Okay, well, without further ado, I would like to call up the screen with the slides and pass over to Ben to tell us a little bit more about the Apprenticeship Levy. Ben, over to you.
Shall I nod to you to
yes,
take us down through the slides? So if I could just, on the agenda, just a quick overview of what Jason and I are going to cover today. I'm just going to, a brief introduction to Arch and what we think are the key points that we think people in your position, in your roles, need to have in mind as you approach this whole Apprenticeship Levy. I'll then hand over to Jason, who will go through some of the detail. It's one of those ones where sometimes by trying to simplify it, you end up making it more complicated. It is quite a complicated thing, the Apprenticeship Levy, and we make no apology for going through some of this in quite a lot of detail, but given what some of you have just said, we hope that will be useful. And then after Jason has gone through the overview of the levy and what the latest guidance document issued by government means, some of the things about funding bands, we'll take questions from you, and then it'll come back to me to go through some of the next steps. So that's the plan for the hour. We are genuinely really interested in your questions. Those are questions come in. As Tim said, we've done this a couple of times before. It works quite well actually to almost break up the flow. Just if you've got interesting questions coming in, so please do keep them coming in. We can move down to the key takeaways from today. I think there are really 3 really important things that people need to bear in mind as they come towards the implementation of the Apprenticeship Levy and preparing their organisations for it. One, which you've obviously clearly highlighted, and as finance people largely isn't surprising at all, is of course the money. This is 0.5% of payroll. Jason will explain more of the detail, but it's a significant chunk of money that's going to be leaving your businesses every month as of next April, unless of course you do something about it. So that's the first thing. But there are 2 other things I think are really important to understand. The second is around the changes in other aspects of apprenticeships. Firstly, the range of apprenticeship programs that are available and are becoming available, and the quality of those programs is changing dramatically. So whatever impression you may have had of what apprenticeships are, low level, not for bright kids, blue collar, whatever they might be, are almost certainly now wrong. This is a wide range of professions covered, including the ones we specialise in around IT and digital, but actually across all functions and areas there is now pretty much an apprenticeship programme, and they are the kind of programmes, we'll come back to this a little bit later on, they are the kind of programmes you would be happy for lots of your employees to go on, really rigorous and inspiring continuing professional development programmes. And the third thing is, and related to that, is actually the restrictions on who can do an apprenticeship programme have changed. So it's no longer the case that this is just for your school leavers. Actually, this is for programmes that could be used to your graduate programmes. They could be used for people who you're hiring as just part of the normal hiring process, and it's for existing employees. You might want to reskill, or if you've never had the opportunity to have formal training. So it's pretty much everyone in your business, including your good selves, it has the potential to go on a levy-funded apprenticeship program. So if you have a concern about, well, how do I get through my levy, how do I use it, actually the restrictions and the opportunity, the restrictions have shrunk and the opportunities have grown. So I think it's really important before we dive into the detail that we were able to convey that. So moving on to just a quick introduction to Arch, giving you a sense of what we're all about. We started life as the in-house careers talent and skills program for the Blenheim Chalcott Group, which is a group of fast-growing tech businesses, mainly UK based, and we help companies to find digital and IT talent. We've got a number of ways of helping them to do that. Most famously, our apprenticeship program, which is a grade 1 Ofsted program. That's grade 1 is good, by the way. You can't get better than grade 1. It's outstanding. Sorry, it's quite like Jason, which we are obviously really proud of. But we've also, on the back of that, launched a very different talent acquisition program for companies, our graduate business, one sits alongside our apprenticeship business. And of course, with the onset of the levy, a lot of people have been coming to us and asking us for advice and support and getting themselves up to speed. And we package that up as an advisory service to help companies plan between now and the introduction of the levy and beyond. So that's a quick introduction to us. We're based, I should say, so we're in our London Hammersmith base at the moment, but we also have presence in Manchester, Birmingham and Bristol, and of course online, where a lot of our training delivery happens, as you would expect. And just before I hand over to Jason, if I can just move on, we talked about some of the companies we worked with. These are the ones you are more likely to have heard of, but in a range of sectors, some who are digital and IT specialists, which is what we're all about, of course, but some who are retailers or financial services companies, publishers, but where there's a large IT and digital dimension. So we make no apologies for the fact that we are about digital and IT. It's certainly something that's relevant pretty much to every employer we talk to, but it does mean that some of our examples will be drawn from those sectors. That's the area that we know best, of course. The detail of the levy applies across the board. But if there are questions you have about the specifics of other sectors and their programs, we will take those questions and hopefully be able to get back to you. But certainly on the IT and digital, we can answer those straight away. So that's an introduction to Arch.
Great. Well, thanks very much for that, Ben. And now I think to maybe open it up a little bit more and get more into the detail, Jason, can you tell us a little bit more about the levy?
Yeah, of course. So thank you, everyone. Good to be here this afternoon. So if we start off just with a quick reminder of what it is, and it may be that some of this stuff you've heard before, so I apologise to those of you that are a little bit further ahead than others, but actually we still come across a number of people where they're hearing about this for the first time. So just want to go back to a couple of the basics first, if that's okay, just to make sure everyone understands sort of where this is coming at. So it starts next year, on April 6th, 2017, the Apprenticeship Levy will start, it will kick in. As Ben mentioned earlier, the way that this is calculated is based on your payroll costs, and it looks at your annual payroll bill. Effectively, for companies whose payroll is greater than £3 million, you will therefore be under the scope of the levy and liable to pay the levy, which is essentially a tax, a hypothecated tax or a ring-fence tax, which will go into an account that you have, which I'll come on to in just a second. I've got a small example down here. We're talking about 0.5% of 3 million. It's deducted via PAYE. That is done on either the 19th or the 22nd of the month, depending on how you do your returns, whether they're manual or automatic. The first time that will happen is in May. So on May the 19th or May the 22nd of 2017, your first levy bill will be paid, and it will be based upon your April payroll. Okay. There's an example down here of someone where their UK payroll bill is £50 million. That would actually, 0.5% of that equal 250,000. Every employer has an allowance of 15,000, which means they don't actually have to pay the first £15,000 of what they are liable to pay. So in this particular instance on the slide, you'll see that the company ends up paying an annual tax of £235,000 into their levy pot. Now, one of the things that's important perhaps to sort of note here or a couple of things. One is that it's based on April payroll. We have had some customers saying to us, well, actually, if we're going to pay in May, as we pay things like bonuses in April, perhaps they will not be under the scope of the levy in 2017. But, you know, as I mentioned, the key thing here is that the May payment is actually based upon your April pay bill. So if that is the time of the year when bonuses are paid, it may be that your May instalment to the levy pot is greater than other months. I think the way perhaps to describe this is kind of like a spiky profile. So each month, if you imagine, £250,000 of your 3 million will be looked at, and you won't have to pay the levy on that. Anything in your pay bill greater than £250,000, you'll pay into your pot. So actually, maybe in some months, you pay more in than you are in subsequent months. So things like bonuses, commissions, etc. It's a UK pay bill, so that's also really crucial. Some companies I talk to only have worked this out and calculated it based on their English payroll. It is your UK payroll. That's a really important thing to note. Although there are some differences about what happens to it for your employees who are based in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, which perhaps we can get into later on.
Just on that point as well, because this might be covered up by one of the questions that's coming from Debbie Mant.
Yeah.
It's about the legal entity, the PAY entity, rather than the legal entity, isn't it?
It is, yeah. So what the government has also done, because one of the things they realise is that as an organisation, you may have multiple PAYE references, and there may be many people on the webinar that have that particular scenario. And there may also be instances where perhaps you're part of a much larger group, and perhaps in some way you are connected companies. One of the things that you have to note is the £15,000 allowance is only payable once. So, you know, again, I've seen some customers where they'll say, well, I've got 10 PAYE different reference schemes, so therefore will I get £150,000 allowance? No, the £15,000 allowance is a one-time only thing.
Okay. Great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So, as I mentioned, the money will go into something called the Digital Apprenticeship Service, certainly the portion of it that is raised from your English workforce. And again, if we talk about that just for a moment, this is based upon actually the postcode where your employees work. So for people who have organisations that are cross-border, it may also be a scenario where you've got someone who actually lives physically in, say, Scotland, but works in England. It's their work address. So it's where do they physically work. That's how their levy will be calculated based on, does it go into the English pot or will it go into the Scottish pot, for instance. How do you spend it? We spend it with an approved apprenticeship provider on approved apprenticeship training towards an approved apprenticeship framework or standard. And that's obviously quite a mouthful with a particular cold and sore throat, particularly so. Managed to get through that one. But effectively, if you have already, as many of you will, internal training programs, what we need to look to do is to map those in some capacity towards an approved standard or an approved framework. I think Ben will touch on that a little bit more later, where we're going to a little bit more depth on that. So there's an expiry date. The money that goes in, it goes in every month. So from May 17, every month you'll be paying into the pot. Whatever goes in basically lives in there for 2 years. And this is one of the key changes from the October announcement, which some of you may have missed. It was 18 months. The government listened to the consultation process and extended it, so organisations have a little longer to spend it than they previously did. You now have 2 years to take out of the pot, what you put in. So effectively, what went in May 2017, really by April 2019, you need to have spent that particular month's instalment, otherwise it will be lost. It won't be returned to you, which again is one of the things that is a bit of a gotcha. It will be lost, it will be taken and spent elsewhere.
And how does that work if, say, the payroll is going up and down on a month-by-month basis? Does that get carried over in some way? Can you use that, or is that lost?
So, as I say, each month what will happen on the 19th or 22nd, you'll report the prior month's payroll bill and pay your 0.5% of that. So therefore, there may be occasions where things can happen and get slightly out of kilter, but hopefully that's minimised in the sense that when you're paying in, it is based on the prior month's pay bill that you've had and experienced.
Okay. I had a question here from Laura Wills.
Is it something slightly different that I missed? Or?
It's due to receive a refund for the second month if it's lower, but I think actually...
Right, okay. So this is if, I guess there will be organisations who fall upon that cusp almost of some months they may be a levy payer because it's greater than 250,000, and next month they may be less than 250,000. Well, the money will stay in your digital account, but at some point will be reconciled with you. And at the end of the year, it was then calculated that, oh, actually, you peaked in a couple of months, but across the whole year you were less than 3 million. Then actually something will happen in order to return that money to you, which I think may be the question.
I think that's right. So there's a if the example is if you break down that £15,000 allowance on a monthly basis, it's £1,250
a month.
So imagine in 1 month you, this may be your situation, your 0.5% is £1,000. It would be £1,000. So you don't pay that because it's underneath the £1,250. Next month it might be £1,500. Because it may have spiked and you may have a much bigger pay bill. And so I guess the question is, do you at that point have to pay that £250? The answer, as we understand, is no. They will take into account the fact that you were under last month and even that out. So as you go, there will be an evening process for people who are on the cusp of the levy payment.
Thank you.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Ben.
And some relevant questions coming in there, I think, just as you were clarifying. Can I just go
Yeah.
back to one of the questions from earlier on?
Sure.
Just coming from Chris and Norman about does this apply to taxable earnings or gross earnings, i.e. PAYE? Jason?
So it's the gross. In fact, I've got a statement which I'll actually, if it will be helpful, put into the slides and send out. There's a statement there which talks about whether it's secondary class 1 NICs, and it gets really quite complex. And again, the financial people on the call, I'm sure, will understand that. So what we'll do is we'll make that statement available.
It's on the next slide.
Is it on the next slide still? Because it was on there, but I thought we removed it.
Oh, no, we haven't removed it.
So it's on. No, that's fine. It's one that we will send out.
Okay.
But it will be looking at gross salaries, so it will include things like pension. It will include things like bonus and commission and those kind of payments as well. Absolutely.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. So, keep going, new funding rules. Well, up to the 30th of April, any starts that happen, which is on the next slide there, please, Tim, any starts up to the 1st of April on apprenticeship programs will be funded using the current system. It's basically any starts on apprenticeship programs from the 1st of May, the levy will be utilised to pay for those particular starts. First time eligible employers will have to declare in May 2017. I mentioned that earlier. So on May the 19th or May the 22nd, you will declare and make your instalment, your pay, based on the April pay bill. How apprenticeships work is that there are 15 bands, so if I'm going to spend my money, which clearly is perhaps what most of you are hopefully looking to do, is how do I recoup some kind of value back for this, is naturally, hopefully you'll be looking to start apprentices, whether that's existing employees or new hires. There are 15 funding bands in which apprenticeships are placed, so if you like, there's kind of a set cost or fee, if you like, per apprentice. There are 15 of those. There were previously 6. Again, that was recently changed as recently as August. The band starting at £1,500 per apprentice up to £27,000. All sorts of different, there's some examples of that later on. But essentially, every apprenticeship is mapped against one of those bands, regardless of a learner's age or geographical location. Again, that's some of the big changes from August. Prior to that, where you lived and how old you were affected how much you paid for the apprenticeship. Those things have been removed. And then there's something called co-investment as well, which is a bit like perhaps the question that we had here. What happens in scenarios where perhaps there are some months I pay into the scheme and some months I don't, and I'm recruiting apprentices and spending the money? What happens if I want to spend more than the levy actually entitles me to? As an example of that down here, the government naturally wants to incentivise you to do so. So if you want to basically start more apprentices than your levy pot allows you to buy, then the government will fund 90% of the cost of those, with the individual companies only having to fund 10% of that cost. So a real incentive for you to perhaps do more, and I understand that for the very large levy payers that might be less likely than perhaps some of those ones that are on the smaller end of that scale. Also for essentially any employers who are not liable to pay the levy. So if their levy is basically less than £3 million, which means they don't come under the scope. What happens with them? There's a similar scenario for them too, in that 90% of their training will be funded by government and 10% by themselves as well. Some sort of other incentives for taking 16 to 18-year-olds. If you recruit young people in your business, then effectively there are other incentives available for that too, which again we can cover off at some stage if anyone would like to go into more detail there. So next slide is around some of those incentives. In fact, so 16 to 18-year-olds, £1,000 incentive. Essentially, a provider like us will get one of those, and the employer will get one of those as well. Somebody described it as cashback. I don't know whether that's the right statement to describe it, but effectively, if an organisation is utilising their levy on the younger audience because the government realises that perhaps they need a little bit more work with the younger guys and girls because they have less experience, they actually incentivise you to do so by paying £1,000 back to those employers who recruit people within that age bracket. Well, one of the key ones, I think, particularly for the finance people on the phone, is the next one, which is around national insurance contributions. And I'll let people take a moment just to read that statement there. But effectively, if you've got people in your organisation who enter an apprenticeship programme who are under 25, then you'll be no longer required to pay secondary class 1 national insurance contributions, which is currently at 13.8%. So that would be a cost saving to you as an organisation if some of your existing employees or new hires under the age of 25. That's something as an employer that you no longer have to pay. So potential cost saving there.
And is that a relatively new development that's come out in the latest round of clarification?
It is, and it's been spoken about for a little while, and they've been doing various things with apprentices for national insurance contributions, and always trying to make it more and more of an incentive, if you like, for employers to do so. The final point on this slide is the 24-month warning, and just a reminder, 24 months to spend what you've put in, increased from 18. So who can do this? And this is some of the key questions I'm sure many of you have got. Certainly one of the polls earlier suggested this. Existing staff and new hires can do this. And Ben will go into a little bit more detail on this in just a moment. One of the things that the current system didn't allow was graduates. Once you'd passed essentially the first year of your degree programme, you were no longer eligible for an apprenticeship. But under the levy scheme, the government have realised that perhaps that's an important area for many employers. So graduates will be eligible to enter an apprenticeship programme. There's a couple of caveats to that. Either it needs to be a programme that's something substantially different from what they've learnt before. So the example we always use is in marketing. We get people who've studied history at university, moving into marketing. Clearly that's substantively different from their degree. There is no reason why they couldn't complete a lower level qualification or a lower level apprenticeship compared to their degree. That would be absolutely fine. Clearly, if a graduate has a degree in marketing and would like to study marketing as an apprentice, they would have to do something at a higher level than their degree. And many universities are looking at things like master's level programs, which I'm sure over the next 12 to 18 months we'll start seeing some of those developed too. So there are four essentially different sets of people that you may want to spend this money on. The first is school leavers, typically leaving school at either 16 or 18, and a great source of young, new, bright, enthusiastic talent into your business. Graduates, as we've just mentioned. The business as usual hires. Many employers I talk to, and I know Ben has exactly the same conversations, is employers will say, how on earth am I going to recruit 100 new people into my business every year? And when you ask the secondary question or the follow-up question to that, how many people do you recruit at the moment? Typically you get back an answer that says, oh, around 60 or 80 a year, new people, new hires, we're expanding, it's to replenish people that have left the business, etc. And really what we're talking about here is how do we make it so that those people that you're hiring anyway, for those reasons, into your business, how do we make it so that we can look at those and see where the apprenticeship opportunities lie for those staff, not just young hires into your business?
And that's actually an incredible opportunity for businesses to engage with those potential employees early on and say, we're going to put you into a framework and invest in your learning and development from the get-go.
Exactly.
I think that's exactly right. I think there's, for people that, we're thinking here about people who might be on their second or third job, where there's, as we know, more churn in the labour market, and actually being able to keep people, depending on your company and where you are and all the rest of it, but for some people, being able to keep someone for 3 years as opposed to 18 months is a really important objective. And actually offering this, not only do you join us and get the exciting role, but should you pass your probation, you get to join, the company's high potential program or whatever it is, and that's a program that is an apprenticeship program. They don't necessarily need to be sold it as an apprenticeship, but actually that's what they're doing. So as a tool for, as you were saying, as a tool for exciting continuing professional development for new employees to get more applicants for roles and then to retain those people for longer when you've got them. I think there's real kind of untapped possibility there.
Absolutely, yeah. And it kind of leads on to the next one, the sort of fourth grouping there, which is those existing employees, existing workforce, and where are the opportunities for them to complete their apprenticeship too. And I think the key thing here, and again in our experience, don't call them apprentices necessarily. Maybe sometimes with the people who are the business as usual hires or are the existing employees, if they've worked in the business for a while, sometimes they may not actually want to be called an apprentice. That's fine, we're using the term, it's a structured training program, and clearly it has to be mapped to an apprenticeship, and it's the Apprenticeship Levy that will fund it. But it doesn't mean you can't be called a digital marketing exec or an IT engineer or a software developer or whatever. And you don't have to be called an apprentice if that's something that you think in your organisation may be a barrier for some of your existing or business as usual hires.
And I think we're going to come on to in a minute the sort of frameworks and how we can actually match that to the specific skills which organisations require.
Exactly. So there are more announcements due. One of the other things to mention though is that actually if you don't feel you're going to necessarily spend all of your levy pot, there is an opportunity actually to assign that and potentially give it to someone. Because as I mentioned earlier, if you don't spend it, then you will lose it. So perhaps you'd like some kind of say in where it goes if you were not to spend it yourselves. So the government are working on how exactly that's going to work. But there may be an organisation who is also a levy payer that you have strong links with, or as part of the supply chain or whatever. And it may be that actually you want to work in partnership with them and allow them to spend your unspent levy. And there's certain rules around that, but that's something that's been in all the documentation so far as well. Okay.
Would I just give you a chance to grab some water? I'm conscious you've got a very sore throat.
It's fine. It's fine.
Okay.
Any particular questions or that you want me to answer now, Tim?
I think we could probably carry on.
Okay.
One question from Sharon Gannon, which I can answer quickly, is will the slides be shared? Yes, they will. We'll be sharing the slides and the recording of the video with everybody who's been here, plus people outside. So please do feel free to share that with your colleagues and friends as well.
So let's just pass back over to Ben here. It's about what it can and can't be spent on.
Yeah.
And there's a couple of little sort of do's and don'ts there with regards to how you spend it, and then there's a further slide with a little more detail for Ben as well. If that's okay.
Yeah, of course. So in terms of one of the key questions, well, what can I use the levy for? And actually, this is where the government has always had a very clear line and hasn't budged for it in all of the consultation. So what it can be used for, apprenticeship training and assessment against the approved framework or standard, as Jason mentioned, and with an approved training provider and separately an approved assessment organisation. So this is something that's slightly new. If you've had experience of dealing with apprenticeships in the past, you'll know that the way a person achieves the qualification is to go through a series of modules. Some of those are on-the-job modules, some of them are off-the-job. But essentially, as the person goes through those modules, the box for each one is ticked, and that bit is complete. And when all of the boxes have been ticked, that's it, that's done. Actually, in the new world, it's going to be considerably more rigorous. There's going to be an end-point assessment, so a moment when the person on program will be assessed to see if they are competent in the role that they are doing the apprenticeship in. And in turn, that means that there's a new type of organisation that's emerging, the endpoint assessment organisation. And that assessment clearly comes with a fee, so the money that you have for each apprenticeship has to go on that, as well as on the training. and up to the maximum for the band that apprenticeship is put into. It doesn't mean you can't spend more on that apprenticeship, it's just you can't spend more of your levy up to that amount. So it's all about the training and the assessment. So important to understand what that can't be used for, so certainly not wages and salary, and that's why lots of people are saying, well, actually, let's use existing employees where we've already kind of taken their headcount. It can't be used for travel and subsistence, managerial costs. There's another program, pre-apprenticeship program that the government funds called traineeship, so they can't be funding for that, or work placement programs, or crucially, the costs of setting up an apprenticeship program. You can, if you want, become your own training provider. So it is possible for you to do that. But that brings you into the ambit of the Skills Funding Agency audit, means that you're liable to Ofsted inspections and have to do all the recording and compliance that a training provider has to do. Lots of those training providers, people like us and others in different sectors, already have an infrastructure in place to capture the information and keep the monitoring records and deliver the training and so on and so forth. And if the levy funding is going to them to provide the training, clearly they're going to be able to absorb some of those overhead costs that you otherwise would not be able to use the levy for. So I think it's really key to be clear about some of that. If I just go on, just to, how does an apprenticeship work? What does a new apprenticeship look like? This is the process, broadly speaking, that people are going to need to go through. And it starts with not how can I get rid of my levy as quickly as possible, but actually what are the training and what are your training and your hiring needs. So understanding what training you currently do, mapping that potentially to the programs. So you need to become familiar with the programs that are available, that are becoming available, in order that you can see which of those might be convertible into an apprenticeship. Some will, but clearly some won't as well. So it's not a case, I think certainly we hear from HR and L&D folk that they're coming under pressure from finance folk to eliminate the training budget because it's going to be replaced by the levy instead. Actually, we don't think that's going to be possible, and certainly not in the first year or two when people are actually working out exactly how the levy can be spent. But work out your training needs, work out your hiring needs, look at the programs, the apprenticeship programs, these are the approved standards that can deliver that, and then make that initial kind of call on, is it going to be school leavers? Maybe you've already got a school leaver program, or maybe you want to expand it. You may have a graduate program already, which actually the training component of that could be really well delivered through an apprenticeship program. The new business as usual hires and existing staff that Jason talked about. And then you need to work out actually how much of my levy is that going to use and who is going to deliver that for me. I think the selection of your provider to help with this is a really crucial step in the process, and one that we would really advise. You will have, I'm sure, lots of calls, people coming in and saying we can help, is to treat it as you would any other large-scale procurement and really make sure these suppliers kind of sing for their supper and demonstrate that they're the right people to help you out. And it may be that you need more than one supplier, actually more than one approved provider who can deliver the specialist training required for the different fields in which you want to run your apprenticeships. There's then obviously the process of hiring the new staff or onboarding existing employees. That second bit sometimes gets forgotten, but actually if you're taking someone up onto a year or 18-month long professional development program, they need to be in the right frame of mind. They need to be motivated, they need to feel like this is a special thing for them, and they need to understand what's going to happen. And certainly it's worth your while to invest, perhaps not as much in onboarding them as hiring new staff, but certainly you shouldn't ignore it. And then that leads into the apprenticeship itself. And I think sometimes in the conversation around apprenticeships and apprenticeship levy, we forget that actually this is a really exciting program for people to go on. If it's put together in the right way, you've got the right motivation, the right support in place for the person on program, the right provider helping you to deliver this training, then it can be, this should be one of the most memorable and rewarding years in that person's professional life, because the opportunity to be stimulated, to learn, to take on new technical skills, to try new things out in a safe environment off the job and bring that stuff back onto the job and see the impact on their productivity while going through that, ideally with a cohort of other people, that sense of collaboration and shared learning is one that we think is really exciting. Actually, when we look on the apprenticeships that we've delivered for others, when that is what we are creating, and it's really an exciting experience and should have a major impact on the productivity for you in terms of what you're trying to achieve. Of course, that then needs to be, I mentioned the endpoint assessment already. This is a new thing. We're all going to be learning a bit about how this works. But the idea is there's a real sense of achievement, I think, when people come through that endpoint assessment. And then we've just said, this is success and continuing professional development. There's going to be, as more programs come on board, it may be that in the first year of the program, most of the apprenticeships you will do will be at level 3 and 4. But actually, as more programs come on stream, we can see a world in which people perhaps join as a school leaver at level 3, they're 2-3 years into your organisation, into a level 4, and then maybe as they move up into their mid-20s, they want to do a degree apprenticeship as well. So we see some really exciting possibilities for this. So happy to answer any questions on that and how it works. Jason, things back to you.
Great, thanks Ben. So there's an example there of some of the standards that we work on. So from software developer down to IT technical salesperson. Levels, there's different levels, as Ben rightly mentions. Effectively, level 6 is an honours degree level. Level 3 is where a lot of apprentices tend to start out, again, as Ben mentioned. And there's some examples there of the typical duration of those programs and how much it's likely to cost you from your levy pot. So just some examples for you to take a view of. Clearly, there are many other standards than that in finance and HR and all sorts of other sectors as well, and actually, we work with a couple of partners too, and if there's other things that you may have an interest in, there's no reason why you can't still talk to us at Arch, because maybe we can also point you in the right direction of someone else who can help with the things that we can't necessarily help with ourselves.
Just on that, Jason, could you just clarify for the audience, how will it work if they have specific skills gaps that they've identified in their organisation? And maybe they're looking to see if there is an apprenticeship. So an off-the-shelf solution would be one option.
Yeah.
But if they can't find an off-the-shelf solution, it's a bit of a off-the-shelf solution, how do they then go about finding a way of bringing that in? Because now the new system lives away, isn't it?
There is no, Tim, it's a really great and valid question. So yeah, effectively, the government has published a list of all the available apprenticeship frameworks and standards that currently exist. And there's a number of them. There are around 350 frameworks, which are all being replaced currently by standards, which Ben spoke briefly about. And again, there's a whole number of those that are published. There's around 120 of those that are published. But there's more every day that are being published. So I guess if you talk to us, we can provide you with that list, so you can see it and find the list of the current apprenticeship standards that are out there, so we can work out whether they're suitable for you or not.
Yeah.
As you rightly state, Tim, they're being developed all the time. So we're a member of an employer group who effectively help create new apprenticeship standards. So you need to be in a group of at least 10 employers where you come together and you feel that there is a need for you to use an apprenticeship like this. So one of the examples that we should talk about is perhaps media planning and buying in the advertising sector, which is one of the things that we're working on at the moment, with a number of employers have all expressed an interest to say that is something we absolutely need in our sector. So as long as we've got at least 10 of those together, we create a brand new standard. We can submit that to BIS, which is the government department that looks after all this stuff, and get that approved and signed off, basically mapped to one of those funding bands we're seeing on that slide. And then from that moment onwards, you're free to take apprenticeships and apprenticeship places using that standard in your levy to pay for it. Yeah. So if there are ones out there that you want and aren't currently in existence, talk to someone like us and how do we create them?
So there really shouldn't be any reason why a business shouldn't be able to draw down on this fund now to be able to focus on an area of skills that they need in their organisation.
Exactly.
And I suppose the other point I wanted to raise on this slide was around the personalisation. I mean, here you've got quite a sort of top-line view just to show the type of bands, but actually every organisation will be different. They'll all be having different types of skills requirements, but also different levels. And so there's no one size fits all approach here. It's more a case that if somebody wants to understand what the cost will be to them, they probably do need to sit down with somebody like one of our consultants and get an idea of how it works in their organisation based upon all these different variables.
Exactly, Tim, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. That's everything, Tim, from me, actually. There's some frequently asked questions, but if there are some from the people on the webinar that we'd like to go to first,
Great.
perhaps that's a good place to go, and we can listen with the others that we've got if there aren't any. That's never happened before.
So we do have quite a few questions from the audience, which is great. So I'm going to try and work through those now. If you've been thinking of those questions during the session, now is the time to jot them down. What I would say is that we'll try and give answers that are quite generic, that work for all organisations. But there is that opportunity for you to speak to one of our consultants and have a free call with them to talk through your organisation and your very specific needs. And I've just alluded to then, every organisation is going to have different needs and different levels. So we're very happy to spend some time with you and go through that in more detail. Okay, so I'm going to try and go through some of the questions now. If I'm squinting down into the corner of the screen, let me just bring it up. It's not that I'm checking my Facebook, it's that I'm just going to try and go through some of these questions here. So I'm going to try and start at the top with a relatively quick question from Joe Smith. Is it definitely their work postcode? I thought it was their home postcode.
No, the way it works in today's system, so up until the levy starts, so between now and clearly next May, it is, the person's absolutely right, based on their home postcode. But from May the 1st of next year, that switches, it becomes a work postcode. And obviously as an organisation, your employees will be registered with HMRC at a particular work address. It's that work address that will be used to calculate whether they go into the English system or one of the nations. But it is a change, the person's right, it's currently the home address that's used, but that will alter in May.
Right. And a question which has come up a couple of times actually, which is with regards to the nations within the UK. Is there further guidance on how this would impact upon Scottish businesses? That's a question from Ian. And I think there was another question before about coming in from Twitter about how this would work across all the other nations. Ben, do you want to jump in on that?
Well, Jason was going to correct me if I'm wrong, but it's suffice to say that the Welsh, Scottish and Northern Irish government, so it's a devolved matter, so skills and vocational training is something that those governments and parliaments decide on, and they are running fast to catch up with where England is. It was, I think, it was an English-only kind of bill, so the levy is done on a UK basis, but this levy pot and vouchers and so on and so forth is all based in England. So the money that is the Scottish or the Welsh or the Northern Irish portion of your levy is going at the moment directly into those administrations, and they are working out whether that's just a top up to what they spend or whether they are going to replicate in some form some of what is going on south of or in south or east of the border, depending on where you are. So at the moment, I think we don't know exactly what's going on, other than that there's a large amount of activity in those areas to try and work out what they do there.
No, Ben's spot on. But as he said, importantly, your total bill will be based upon your UK employees.
Yeah.
So it may be that 80% of your workforce is in England and 20% is in Scotland. Say, well, that 20% will be taken into Scotland in some capacity, and then what happens to it next is still being worked out.
Great, thank you. I think another question here in from Twitter: who and how will the accreditation of internal programs be agreed and awarded? I think you probably alluded to that a little bit before in terms of the training providers delivering.
Yeah. So, as an organisation, if you have an internal training program, that's going to have to be mapped towards an approved apprenticeship standard or framework, and it has to be delivered by an approved apprenticeship provider as well. So, as an existing employer who has an existing internal training program, either you'll need to work with a provider like us or someone else in order to get your program accredited and mapped towards a standard or framework so that the levy can be used to do so. Or alternatively, you may have to think yourselves about an employer about whether you want to go onto the register and become an approved training provider yourselves and also map your program to an approved apprenticeship standard so that you can deliver all of it in-house, internally, and then undergo the things that we do, like Ofsted and audit and all of those kind of things too.
Yeah, certainly not for faint-hearted.
There's a lot of work to do, for sure.
I think the good news on is heading on what is, as it were, allowable training or allowable qualifications inside an apprenticeship is that they want it to be open. They want people to decide what the best training is to get their people up to the standard. The key point is, can this person successfully get through the endpoint assessment? And it's up to companies to work out how they best train people to get there along the way. But it has to be something that has been mapped to the approved apprenticeship standard, in order that the government is not, they want to make sure that they are not, subsidising effectively existing training programs that aren't to the standard and quality that they expect the apprenticeship program to include.
Great, thank you. Getting quite a few more questions in, so thank you for those. Do keep them coming. We'll try to get through as many of them as possible in the next 10 minutes. Question from Karen Carroll. Is the £3 million based on only payroll, i.e. PAYE? Does it not include contractors, subcontractors and agency labour? A quick one for you, Jason.
So I guess there is a little bit of an area here that the government is still trying to work through. And again, Ben, jump in if you want to add anything to this, which is all around that effectively. But it is what the employers, the government call your pay bill, and it's through your PAYE, as you say. What the government clearly don't want to open up is a loophole, perhaps, where suddenly everyone goes on to different contracts, becomes contractors in some capacity, and somehow people are trying to find maybe a way around having to pay this levy. So I think you'll find that there's a whole bunch of work being done about how that actually, in practice, is going to be looked at.
Okay.
So sorry I've not the full answer to that one, but there are still a number of things that are being clarified based on things like that particular question.
And I think it's important to note that the motivation of the government bringing this in the first place is to try and bolster and expand the apprenticeship programme, and they definitely don't want to be creating those loopholes, as you mentioned. A question kind of related to that theme is from Alex Collins, who says, would a history graduate be able to gain funding for an accountancy trailblazer? If so, will the employer purposefully hire non-relevant degree holding graduates to gain funding?
I think that's a very good point. I think the answer, yes, someone who's a history graduate, if they wanted to go into an accountancy apprenticeship, that's totally allowable. Would someone who studied accountancy be able to do the same? No, they'd have to go to a higher level. It's possible, of course, but actually that there would be some gaming like that off the system. But I think what it might actually expose is degree courses which have got the right name but not the right content. So ones that actually employers don't value what the undergraduate is bringing with them. I think they'll be found out through this, but there might be some gaming at the margins, yeah.
And actually rebalances the importance of the skills learned during an apprenticeship versus the value of a degree as well. Okay, another question here from Anna Kelly, specific to the construction industry. In construction, we already pay a CITB levy, which is for training, so that the construction industry. So for the construction industry, I take it we will have to pay for both the apprenticeship levy and the CITB levy. Jason?
Yes. Unfortunately, the answer to that one is yes. So even though there are certain sectors where actually there's been a levy in place for a number of years, it doesn't mean that you won't also have to pay this one. Clearly, what happens with the CITB levy in the future, perhaps there's a debatable question about that, but certainly what you pay into this apprenticeship levy part will be in addition to what you pay into the CITB part. I'm very aware of that existing levy.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
A quick question from Beena Patel. Where can we get a list of all the funding bands? We've circulated that list before. I think we'll send that out again with the demo once we share that out. Yeah. Can we use the levy to fund industry-specific qualifications? That's a question from Jennifer Organ. I think we've probably covered that before when we were going through the table.
Possibly, but so in our sector, within IT or within digital, what we often do is work with organisations, whether it's Microsoft or whether it's Cisco or CompTIA or whatever, and maybe actually within the standard, there are certain what are called knowledge modules, and how you deliver those, basically sometimes it's up for, basically ourselves and the employer to determine. And therefore, what we do in some of our programs is put industry-specific, say Microsoft or CompTIA qualifications into our approved standard, which maps to some of those knowledge modules. So, you know, in our sector, I know it comes up quite a bit actually, where people are very heavily certified with vendor organisations, but it's a case of those vendor organisations and those qualifications have to be recognised by the awarding organisation to be able to use it within the standard as part of the credit that you need.
I think it's also worth saying, just the government have been clear on this, that licence to practice, licence to operate type qualifications are not fundable by the Apprenticeship Levy. So if you need to have a particular safety qualification or whatever to do the job, that isn't fundable by the Apprenticeship Levy, on the grounds that it's something that the employer has to be paying anyway. It's not additional training.
Great. So we've got another 5 minutes left. Just before we come back to questions, we will be doing a few more questions in a second. But I'd like to just do our final poll of the session. So we would, we've offered to make available our consultants to talk to you about the specific circumstances of your organisation. And I just wanted to see whether that would be something you would like to take up. So you see on the screen there, a quick poll, would you like to have a consultation with our experts? Yes, let's arrange a time, maybe early next year, or no thanks. If you could just quickly let us know, that would be very useful. Okay, so, yeah, sure. So I'm just going to close the poll. Thank you very much for voting in those. Just give it. Okay. Great. Well, that's great. We'll definitely make sure we're in touch. And even if we can't help you specifically at this stage, then we'll be sending through those slides. And please do share those with colleagues and friends at other organisations who might find this useful. Increasingly less, thankfully, we're finding people that haven't yet heard of the Apprenticeship Levy and haven't started preparing for it, but we really do want to make sure we're reaching out to everybody and providing that, that expertise. Okay, I'm going to close the poll there. Ben, would you want to go to the next step?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I think we've learned a little bit over the last 3 or 4 months talking to employers large and small about what a sensible plan of action is. We just wanted to share that with you. So between now and May, what does it make sense to do and by when? I think the first thing is, if you haven't done it already, I'm sure you have, but find out how much your levy will be. Do that now if you haven't done it already. I think the internal governance, how you're actually going to run this is an important thing. So someone on point to run this and with support, some sort of steering group with representation, finance and tax, but also of course from L&D and also different parts of the business. Because it is complicated, there is lots of moving parts within this, and it has a large effect on people, and decisions that are taken at a certain point are quite hard to undo. If you set 5 people off on an apprenticeship programme, it's very hard for us to say actually we're going to switch them without losing a lot of your levy money. So getting the governance sorted is really important. That should be done as soon as possible. Some of the questions have been about, well, what are the programmes that are available, what we do. We would suggest really strong getting familiar as quick as possible, identifying your kind of long list of programmes that you think might be familiar, and getting familiar with them. They're only 2 pages long, these standards. They're not too difficult to get on top of, but actually it's really important that you have a sense of what they are all about. We think also if you are new to the world of apprenticeship programmes, get a pilot started, get something underway, get a feel for it. If there's a provider you're interested in working with, get something up and ready. And begin to work through that process to give you some data, to give you a sense of what it's actually going to be like, and to guide your planning process for when the levy has come in. We think do that by get that pilot underway by Christmas or January at the latest. Then I think it's really important, once you become familiar with the programs, to start mapping that to your existing training, seeing where the crossovers might be, getting a sense of how much of what you currently spend might be fundable by the levy. Start doing that in January. At some point, probably before Christmas, but through an iterative process involving all those people on the steering group and beyond, is start to say, well, what could this look like? So in May, how many school leavers, how many existing employees, how many graduates might be put on which programmes? In June, what's the same? Begin to just get a sense of what that is like, and then also understand, well, how much of our levy does that actually consume? Are we left high and dry, not having enough levy, or are we completely underspending? And I think our view is get a plan, get a pretty firm plan in place by March. And alongside that, and of course, leaning on them to help you with this is begin to engage with providers if you haven't already, and really try and finalise which providers you're going to be working with and securing places on their training courses probably by about March time, to give you April to focus on the onboarding of existing employees onto programs and new hires as well. So that's kind of what we see being the crucial steps. So the clock is ticking. We think there's still probably time to get yourself together for the beginning of May, but it's worth beginning to act now.
Great, thank you, Ben. Conscious we've got 3 minutes left. I'd like to just squeeze in a couple of extra questions. I'm going to challenge you both to answer them really quickly, as succinctly as possible. So a question from Ian. Would an accounting graduate recruited into a graduate scheme to follow professional accounting studies such as IC, AEW be eligible for levy funding? Josie?
Only if they were going to do something as an apprenticeship standard that was higher than the degree that they currently hold. So in other words, these master's programs that will be being developed, that would be only the only thing.
Perfect, thank you. And then maybe, Ben, you can maybe pick this one up. Joyce has asked, we don't run an apprenticeship program and employ over 50 people. How much are estimated costs to establish a program?
So it depends on how ambitious you are with the program and how much you want to do with it. But actually, if you're, sorry, can you just say that they've got 50 people?
Yeah,
50 people. So you're talking about a graduate program. If I'm picking this thing, let's say it's a graduate program, say 5 people to do that. Actually, if it was in a single discipline, you should be able to find a provider who could work with you and deliver that program for you at pretty, it should cost you very little actually to create that. What's required is for the people, the managers in the business and the line managers to be excited by it, to invest in the young people, to spend time with coaching them and so on and so forth. But actually, the provider should be able to do the legwork for you at that sort of scale.
Okay, we had a couple of questions in about zero contracts and intermittent contracts. Would they be included in the wage bill? I think the answer is no, but
no, they're not. I mean, what's paid is paid. You know, it's not all for a 0 hours contract. It's what actually gets paid.
What actually did they work?
Great. Okay, well, I think that's all we're going to have time for today. So that's been great. Thank you for all those questions. There's been some really good questions in there across a range of different areas, reflecting, I think, that this is specifically for finance professionals today. But I once again encourage you to please do share what you've learnt on this webinar with your colleagues. Please suggest if they haven't been to one of these webinars before. We'll be running more of these, so please invite them to come along to those. But now I'd like to thank Ben Rowland and Jason Moss for being our experts today. And if you want to find more about Arch, then you can go to archapprentices.co.uk, or you can call 020 8080 9553. All that information is on screen there in front of you. Please do get in touch if you'd like to know more, and I look forward to seeing you at the next webinar. Thank you very much for coming to our webinar, the Apprenticeship Levy.